Hey there, I'm Brad Miller, and today here with Jason Metford, and we're talking about our spiritual path. And specifically today, we're going to talk about the people you bring along with you while you're on the path. Some more willing than others, perhaps, but
Some kicking and screaming.
sometimes, yeah, sometimes that could be the case. Because when you go undergo a kind of a spiritual transformation, when you're kind of going along this path, it's a very individual thing. And just because you're going does not necessarily mean your partner, your spouse, husband, wife, girlfriend, whatever it might be, doesn't necessarily mean that they're on board with it. And sometimes that can be a challenge. Like, how do you deal with that when maybe they're on board or they're not on board with you? And sometimes they are on board. Like I said, I've been very fortunate that my wife has been supportive of my path. And sometimes that happens too. And so, I think a lot of things that could be very relevant and pertinent for people to talk about here today with that. So, um,
Yeah, definitely, because there's the good, the bad, and the ugly that can come along with that, right? And I've experienced, I
exactly.
guess, some of all of that in my own life. And like we were talking before we hit record, we see this quite a bit with people that we know,
Mhm.
groups that we belong to. And so it is an issue that I guess it's an elephant in the room that needs to be discussed because sometimes people come along actively, sometimes people are still supportive, right?
Mhm.
And other times there are people who are actively fighting against you, and sometimes it's even a little passive aggressive
Mhm.
against you, right? Where lip service, they'll kind of say one thing, but then their actions are really showing something else.
Right.
And we've talked a little bit about this, I think, in people kind of orbiting out of your life
Mhm.
and people orbiting into your life. And a lot of times when we've talked about that, it's friends, it's maybe extended family. And I think maybe in those instances, those relationships, it's a little bit easier to move on if you need to,
Right.
right? Because we don't have quite that same attachment that we do to our partner.
Mhm.
And again, we're using that term loosely, whoever, kind of your significant other happens to be, whatever you might call it, if you're married, if you're not married, if whatever your partner,
Mhm.
your intimate person that you're in a relationship with. Um, and like I said, um, I've seen a lot of it from both sides, my own personal experiences as well. So I guess I'll be sharing some things probably today that I might not have shared before, right? And we'll keep it general somewhat to protect the innocent and the guilty. But I think it's an important
Mhm.
topic because it adds kind of a different level of complexity
Mhm.
to some of the things, and some of it is related to our indoctrination and beliefs about certain things.
Mhm.
And I'm still honestly navigating and trying to figure some of this stuff out myself. Right.
Sure.
So where do we start, Brad? Where should we start?
Well, I mean, like I said, I consider myself very fortunate, that I have a supportive wife, a supportive partner. I mean, when I really first started kind of going down this path, we had just or in the process of selling our house. And so I kind of started things when we were kind of in a transition period. So we were living with parents. I was living with my mother for a while, and she was living with her family, and we were kind of traveling back and forth between each other and things like that. But at least half of the week we were kind of on our own. And so I had, a bedroom that was just mine with nobody else. So I could put things in there and do things where I didn't have to worry about whether people thought necessarily. you know, so I could have out crystals or, whatever I needed to do. I could burn incense or do things like that. And it wasn't a big deal because it was basically just me. Close the door. I didn't have to worry about other people. Um, you know, and then after, when we finally got our house, and I have some things that I'd collected, I had some different crystals or things I wanted to put up and things like that. My wife has been very supportive of that. I've got my office space, and basically I can do in here whatever I want. If I want to hang pictures of Satan on the wall, I can do that. Like she's like, okay, that's just like that's fine. If I want to, whatever, I kind of want to do within these walls, she's fine with. And so I've been fortunate, that I can do on the exterior, the stuff that you can see that I'm okay with. More importantly, though, I think is that she's okay with the changes that have occurred in me. And in fact, I would say that she's actually been positively affected, or, well, I'll just say that she's been affected as well by my changes because I can see changes in her too, since I've kind of gone down this path. Things where I'm um, more understanding of things. I don't let things get to me as much anymore. We've talked about things in the past, like buying a car. Like I didn't get all worked up about it. Being able to handle bad, quote, quote, bad things that might happen. It's a lot easier for me to do that and process it. And she has gotten so that she is now able to handle these things better herself as well. Stressful situations. I don't feel that she's getting as stressed anymore about them. Like she's like, all right, you know what? It's not the end of the world. Things will be okay. It'll work out. Like in the past, there was always a concern about, let's just say, money. There's a common one. I know, I'm sure a lot of listeners have
Mhm.
money issues. Not enough money. Where, am I going to have enough to pay bills or whatnot? And there were times where there was a lot of questions like that. Like, you'd get a little bit of money and then all of a sudden the car would break down or something else would happen. And so there was always that question of, am I going to have enough money? Is there going to be enough? This is just my luck. Like, am I gonna be able to make it? Like, how am I gonna pay for everything? Like all these negative stuff. And I've noticed over the past year or two that she has changed. Whereas she would get down into those things. Now she's like, you know what, this sucks, but we'll figure a way through it. We always
Mhm.
have, and we always will. And so she's kind of, well, she's not, I guess, directly going down the path with me. um, I guess she kind of has her own little path that she's kind of taken, and doing it herself.
Mhm.
And I some of that may be because she's seen me on the path, and so she's kind of gone with it too. Some may be that she's just more understanding or accepting of me going down the path. But like I said, I've been really fortunate in that, and I know there's other people out there too. I mean, it sounds like your current partner is probably very similar to that, if not maybe right there in the path with you.
Yeah, because it's interesting. I mean, each person in the partnership are their own individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to, and that's where the idea of unconditional love really comes in, is loving somebody regardless of what they may choose or what their path
Mm-hmm.
is, right? And loving them as they are, loving them as they're changing too, right? Because I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's hard for partners. Um, you know, I'm trying to remember exactly. I've heard this from different people in kind of similar ways, but where a partner will say, how come every time you decide to improve yourself, I have to improve myself too? Right? Or I feel like, you're changing and you're not the person that you were before. And so that makes me have to change. And I don't like having to do that. Right.
Right.
And you hear that or some semblance of that a lot of times from different people. Right. Which,
Mm-hmm.
again, if we think about from their side, you can kind of understand on the one hand, right? We go into things, we go into a relationship, we start
Mm-hmm.
building a life with somebody, and then when that person changes, all of a sudden for the other person, it's like, well, now hold it, that's not what we kind of agreed to at the beginning, right?
Yeah,
And
that's not
so
what I
you,
expected. When like that's not what I got into this. Yeah.
yeah, and so you can understand people saying, "Well, whoa, wait, time out," right? That's not what we kind of agreed to when we got married. That's not the dream or the plan that I
Hmm.
had when we got married, or that I thought we both had together,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
And sometimes honestly, it's like, well, you're right. And, I apologize, but I have changed. I'm different now, right?
Hmm.
Just like we like different kinds of music at different points in time, we might prefer, eating certain things, when we were younger that we do or don't now, right? And so things
Hmm.
do end up changing. And I think that's one of those indoctrinations that we're kind of given is like, oh, no, you get married and everything is supposed to be hunky dory and
Hmm.
everything kind of stays the same the whole time, but it doesn't.
Right.
Nothing ever stays the same, right? And so I had that with my first marriage, right? So again, I've gone through some relationships over my path, right? And so, the first marriage, I was 22, I think, when we got married. I was young. I was, very active in the Mormon church at the time. And so that was kind of like a big thing that we built our life around, was the church and its teachings and all the different things like that. And so, when I, started moving on my spiritual path and started questioning things and didn't want to go to church anymore, it's like that became like a big foundational thing
Hmm.
of, well, look, we go to church as a family and we do this and we do that, and everything revolves around the church, right?
Hmm.
And so when I decided that I didn't want to do that anymore, that I couldn't do that anymore, was really what it was, because I felt like I was being not true to myself.
Hmm.
Then we started having some of these discussions and trying to compromise or do some different things, right?
Hmm.
Like, well, I would still go to church with the family for the first hour and we'd all sit together in the main meeting. And then when we'd split and go to the other places, I'd go sit in the car for 2 hours while they went to their other classes, right? And that worked for a little while, but then it didn't. And so, I can understand from her perspective, right? Is this like, I've
Hmm.
changed, but she wanted to stay the same.
Right.
And so, it kind of got to the point to where it's like, look, this is, we want different things out of life now,
Hmm.
right? I need to go one way, she needed to go another way. Now, obviously, to take that all apart was quite a big deal after 18
Sure.
years and 4 kids and all the other stuff that goes along with it. But it really kind of got to the point of, look, I can't do what we signed up for anymore.
Hmm.
And if can't accept that or can't allow me to do or not do what I think I have to do, then we have to kind of go our separate ways.
Hmm.
And, obviously for me, that was kind of crushing and everything else too, because, part of the indoctrination was, you get married, you stay married, you're married forever, you never get a
Right.
divorce,
Marriage,
right? That's,
love is forever. Marriage is forever. That whole
yeah, and
thing.
that's kind of what I was taught, right? And so again, when I got divorced, it was like, for everybody around us. But that's what needed to happen, right?
Hmm.
She wanted to kind of stay true to what she was doing and what she was believing, and I just couldn't be there anymore. And we couldn't find a way to make it mesh, right? And there
Hmm.
were other things too, right? But that was one of the things that was probably a big reason for the divorce. So,
Yeah.
that's kind of what happened to me. And then I get into a second relationship, and the same thing. I mean, she was pretty supportive, but I continued to make progress along the way. And
Hmm.
even when we got together, I I knew at the beginning that it wasn't going to be for the rest of my life.
Hmm.
I just had that sense at that
Hmm.
time that it wasn't going to be for the rest of our life. She thought it was. I mean, how do you tell somebody that?
Right. Yeah.
You
That's kind
know?
of a rough conversation. I'm sorry, honey, but
Yeah,
we've got
and
like 12 years here, so the time's a ticking. If we're gonna do this, let's
mhm. I mean, but I didn't know the timing. I didn't know how
sure.
long it was going to be for or anything. But like I said, even at the beginning of the relationship, I kind of knew it wasn't going to be for the rest of my life. I didn't know when it was going to end. I didn't know why it was going to end.
Mhm.
And for the most part, she was pretty supportive of me along the journey. But then as I got kind of deeper in, then some of the weird things, start showing up. Like I said, crystals, other spiritual artifacts,
Mhm.
rituals, things like that that are done. And again, for her, it was kind of a little bit, like you were talking about. I had my office, it was my space. I could kind of do whatever I wanted to with that.
Mhm.
But the rest of the house, sometimes a little bit of the stuff, yes, no kind of thing. And there was always this, well, and I know that she believes she was very supportive
Mhm.
or was trying to be supportive in everything that I would do. It just wasn't the relationship that I needed to be in anymore. And I knew that. I got to a point where it's like, you know what? I love you as a person.
Mhm.
You're a great person. There's nothing wrong, but I have to leave this relationship. Now it is time for me to leave the relationship. And again, for somebody, she still cannot understand why, right? Like most
Yeah.
people want an excuse. They
Mhm.
they
What
they
did I
want
do?
yeah, what
What?
did I do? What did I do wrong? What did, there has to
Mhm.
be some excuse for this relationship to end. And that was the hardest thing. And like I said, I don't think she still even understands that there's nobody to blame.
Right.
There was nothing wrong. I just have to move on, right? And again, for part of it, it was um I needed to move environments,
Mhm.
right? So not just physically, but also relationally, because I couldn't grow the way I needed to grow and kind of make the next steps unless I was planted somewhere else. And again, I know this is like
Mhm.
it's a so it's kind of like saying, look, I have to go off to war. There's nothing wrong, but I can't be here anymore. I have to leave and go on this next journey, and I'm not coming back home, right? Which to somebody is like, well, I don't understand this. Well, I know I
Right.
don't totally either, but that's what it feels like, right?
Mhm.
And to be able to say to that person, which again, it's nothing about them, right? They're free to have their life, follow the path that they're going to follow. I just couldn't be there anymore, right? Because it was like I'm this huge oak tree or this huge palm tree, and I'm stuck in the corner of this, you know, low ceiling, like a 6 foot ceiling warehouse in the back in the dark. And it's like
Mhm.
I can only be there for so long. I can only grow so high in those environments. I had to
Mhm.
literally transplant myself, pick up my
Mhm.
tree, and move it to the right environment, physically, relationship wise as well, so
Mhm.
that I could grow and I could kind of move on with what I needed to do. Right. So
Yeah.
again, sometimes the partner is supportive, still loves you, is trying to do what they can to support you, but
Mhm.
sometimes, and again, it was not anything active, right? Like she wasn't necessarily actively fighting me, but when I would need to do certain things, there were all of a sudden all these different compromises that we had to make.
Mhm.
Like uh, you know, I do some candle ceremonies, and some of those candle ceremonies they burn 24/7 until they go out. Well,
Mhm.
she wasn't very comfortable having burning candles in the house if we weren't there. And I know
Mhm.
I've heard this from a lot of people. A lot of people aren't comfortable with that because it's like danger,
It's
danger,
gonna,
danger.
right, catch on fire. We're gonna come
Catch,
home and the
oh
house will
my
be gone.
gosh, the house is going to be gone, right? And it's like, well, but
Mhm.
how many churches have candles burning all the time and they never have an issue, right? So it's like, so anyway, we came up with a compromise and I had to put them in the bathtub, right? But any of the other
Mhm.
candles, I was supposed to, put them out, which I didn't want to do. So that was one of those examples where it was trying to come up with a compromise that didn't really work in total. It
Mhm.
did, but it didn't in a way.
Right.
And so there was kind of some passive aggressiveness of trying to get in the way of certain things I needed to do. And
Mhm.
sometimes it was, look, I'm doing this. I have to do this. Doesn't matter what you say, I'm going to do this anyway, right? Because we both have to do what you have to do. There's obviously consequences for it, right? And
Right.
so and so that was kind of more my experience the next time. We had again kind of outgrown each other,
Mhm.
and for whatever reason, I needed to move on, and I didn't have a good excuse, right? It would have been
Mhm.
different like if, well, I no longer love you and I'm in love with someone else, and then
Right.
and
Yeah,
then
the
and
person
then
down the street.
people,
Yeah.
yeah, then people down the street and everybody else could understand. It's like, oh, it's not her. It's, he was
It's
an
him.
asshole. Yeah, he went
Right.
he went and had an affair. I don't whatever, right? But it
Mhm.
wasn't that, right? It was none of that. And so it's harder to explain.
Mhm.
Or even I've heard some women who have gotten divorced, they're like, it would have been easier if he would have died than if we got divorced. And I'm like, what? They're like, yeah,
Mhm.
because at least if he died, people would feel sorry for me and it wasn't my fault. But because we got a divorce, then there's somebody to blame. Which again, it's not
Mhm.
true. That's just a story that people tell themselves from an indoctrination standpoint.
Right.
Um, but that kind of happens. I mean, that's another
Mhm.
scenario. Now, I know I've been talking for a while, so I'm going to shut up because I've
No.
got more relationships that I can talk about too.
Y-
But
No. Yeah, no, you've had more relationships and more various experiences than I have. So like you've got more that experience there to talk about with it. But I think there's a couple different points that I kind of caught there. One of which is that sometimes it's the fact that you are changing and going in one direction on your spiritual path, and the other person maybe either isn't changing or their path is taking them a different direction. You talked about your first marriage there, where your wife was, you had the very strong kind of, Mormon faith and kind of everything else. But your path was taking you someplace else.
mhm,
And so it was a kind of divergence of paths. At some point, your paths were just too far apart for it to make sense to stay together.
yeah,
Um,
yep,
and so, like you said, there's not a fault there. That's just, I mean, people drift apart. Friend happened with friends. Like I tell the story that I had three guys that were groomsmen at my wedding. Out of those three, two of them I've not talked to in probably 10 years. Because shortly after all that, after got married and stuff, we started drifting apart. I was the only one of out of those the three of us, I was the only one that was married. They were kind of single and had their lives and were going a kind of different direction of things that they like to do. And I had different stuff that I was more interested in then. And again, it's nothing that they did. There's no fault, like you said, to be blamed here. It's just that our paths, our lives started going in different directions to the part where we just didn't really have that stuff in common anymore.
mhm,
Right. Like there was just there was that gap now between us and me and them. And so, it went separate ways. And it's easier, like you said at the beginning, it's easier when it's friends. It's even easier when it's like extended family, even, siblings or something like that, cousins, even parents. because and I suppose even children to some extent, because you can be like, you know what, we're just not going to see each other anymore. But when it's a spouse, when it's someone that you, like you said, are intimately, related with and everything else, it can be really tough. Not just dealing with yourself, but then something you mentioned this last time, this what other people think. When they see like, whoa, well, if they've got a divorce, one of them must have been, cheated, or somebody must have done something to cause it. Like it's hard for people to look and say, oh, well, maybe they just were
Maybe they
changed.
just grew apart. It's okay.
Yeah.
Divorce is normal, you know.
Yeah, there's still that negative, that stigma around divorce, and it's this, that we've got right now in society. This is some negative thing that it's, there's got to somebody did something wrong, because if they didn't, then they'd stay together forever. But I mean, that's not how that works anymore. Like that's not the way relationships work with people. Like constantly going in and out of relationships with other people. And so why it's no different than with a spouse, a partner, someone like that.
Well, and it's no different. It's just it feels more intimate and personal. And so
Sure.
one thing that I'll share too is, like when you're talking about extended family, let's say, right? And making stuff up. But let's say that you have a brother, right, that is just a negative person, just negative. Always, when you we've talked about this before, right? Like energy matching and
Hmm.
emotion matching kind of a thing,
Yep.
that you're doing everything you can to be positive, to be grateful, to be loving, all these different things. And then you see your brother and, oh, complaining about the government, complaining about the president, complaining about this, complaining about that, whatever, right?
Hmm.
It's easy for us to see when it's somebody like that that we don't live with and say, hey, look, brother, I'm going to do what I can to kind of avoid, right,
Hmm.
having to be with you.
Right.
And there it's a lot easier to kind of do that when you don't live with the person.
Yep.
It's hard when you're living with a person and
Hmm.
your vibration no longer matches theirs,
Hmm.
especially if it feels like they're pulling you back down, right?
Right.
Like you're trying to be high vibration and something's always wrong. They're always complaining. They're always the wet blanket. They're raining on your parade, if you will.
Hmm.
It's harder to, because you're inundated with it 24/7,
Hmm.
right? But the problem usually is, since you're living with these people, your finances may be all mixed up together. You may have kids
Hmm.
together. It's much harder to separate that relationship, and it causes a lot more pain, a lot more time,
Hmm.
often money, in order to get out of those relationships, because you're so entwined, because you've built your life around this other person,
Hmm.
right? Usually means one of you having to move out, maybe selling the house, other things like that, right? And so I think a lot of times we stay in relationships, especially intimate relationships, longer than we normally would, because
Hmm.
of the apparent pain
Hmm.
that it takes to get out. But again, that's just an illusion. It's just an illusion, and you're much better off usually very shortly after it happens. So, like last divorce, within a month or two, I was totally different. Totally different. It didn't take me a year or two to work through or kind of come on the other side. Literally, it was a month or two, for me this time. And it was the freedom, the lightness, the everything else was just is amazing, right? it, and so again, it was, but I had learned this, from a
Hmm.
previous experience. I knew that it wasn't the end of the world. I knew that I wasn't dying. I knew that things were going to get better. right? At that
Mhm.
point. And so I already had some experience in that. And so the second time, much easier for me,
Yeah.
especially because I had learned from the first marriage what not to do. So it wasn't quite as hard to decouple everything the second
Right.
time around, right?
Mhm.
Um, so that's again, for people that are listening and think, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world, whatever. Hey, you know what? It's not, because I can promise you that it's not. Yep, you might have to start over financially again. It might be hard. You might have to adapt a little bit financially, emotionally, other ways for a period of time, but it will change. It will get better
Mhm.
if you have the courage to actually do something about it. Right. And the first thing is
Mhm.
probably to have some of the open and honest communications about it and just see,
Mhm.
where you're at and what's actually going on. Because, again, you may be perceiving something that your partner is doing, and that's not what their intention is,
Mhm.
right? And so having some of those communications and digging into it, things may be fine, right? There may be ways to kind of compromise, and again, I know a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to compromise. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And yes, there's some things probably that you can't compromise on, but there's other things that you probably can, right? Because that's part of a relationship. And the honest truth is sometimes relationships are a little messy. Sometimes they require effort and energy
Mhm.
in order to get them to work, but it's also one of the main tests, if you will, that we go through in this life is how to live with and become one with another human being.
Yeah.
So it's, making whatever that C word is now that I can't remember, right? And kind of modifying both of your lives and having kind of some compromises can be okay, right? It can be okay. Sometimes it can't be, and then at that point you have to kind of decide what you're doing. But, when you are with somebody that you're really vibrating with and the energy meshing is right, it's a totally different relationship. It's a totally different relationship. And it doesn't mean that it's not more challenging sometimes, because all relationships can have their challenges,
Sure.
but it's just different. It's different, right? And so, as an example, like the relationship that I'm in now, neither one of us were looking for a relationship. I mean, I fully left my last relationship thinking I'm going to be
Mhm.
single for years. I may never have a partner like that again.
Mhm.
She was kind of the same way, and yet we're not, neither one of us is looking for anything, and somehow the universe just slaps us together. And it's like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting that either. What does this mean? Sort of a thing. And we're
Mhm.
still, kind of navigating all of that because, the same thing. I have my own experiences. I have,
Mhm.
still some baggage from other lives, childhood, other relationships that
Sure.
I'm working through. She has the same thing. And we're learning how to mesh together and how to make sometimes some of those compromises, if you will, to allow each other to be who they are
Mhm.
and to be respectful, of that. I mean, she has some certain practices or does some things that I don't necessarily feel like I have to do or need to do, but I participate with, to support her and
Mhm.
support her in what she's doing. And she supports me in what I'm doing, as
Mhm.
well. And you can find a balance um, between all of that. And I can tell you, it's is totally different when you're with somebody who really gets you, that you're connected with energetically, and you're not just living with, right, or
Mhm.
coexisting with.
Yeah, and I totally found that living with kind of situation when I first got married. Like when my wife would complain that kind of like I was treating her like a roommate,
That's
you
what you
know.
were used to. You were living with the guys in
Because
college, right?
right, exactly, yeah, because that's what I was used to, living for through college and that kind of stuff. You've got roommates you live with, and so it's very easy, never having been in a long-term relationship before that. How do you act? How do you how do you respond? How do you combine? Like that. And so the one thing I knew was, hey, this is how I treat the other, the guys I live with. You dirty a dish, you wash your dish. Like if somebody doesn't wash their dishes, you stick them in their bed, until they wash them. That kind of, I
No,
mean,
you didn't put him in her on her side of the bed, did you?
no, I did not. There was threats made at some point about that. Um, but kind of a look out for yourself sort of situation when you're living with a roommate. And so when you do get into a relationship like that, it was tough for me to then go to, all right, how do I treat someone as more than just a roommate? you know um but
Well,
like you
and I think
said, once you find somebody though where that you want to um make that connection with, um the experience is totally different.
yeah, and it's, maybe that's part of our relationship issues in general as humans, is we continue to think like the roommate thing, right? Instead of how can I love and accept this person for who they are? How can I, do things that are, if you go back to like the love languages, acts of service,
Mm-hmm.
gifts, words of affirmation, and
Physical touch.
physical touch, right? Or the four that are talked about in that book. Well, how can I, learn more about what my partner needs, and actually, do things different? And so I'll give
Mhm.
you, because you brought up the dishes, and we've talked about dishes before, and I've talked about dishes before, right?
You have to, yeah.
I've
Dishes is a
talked
thing.
about dishes.
Hmm.
And so there's just some interesting things about like the relationship I'm in now, where she doesn't hold on to some of the stereotypes, let's say, that are expected for a man, right? Like if you take the toilet, right? Oh, men, you got to put the toilet seat down, right? And if you don't put the toilet seat down, then you get in trouble. So I've been trained like my whole life to put the toilet seat down, right? Because lived with women, had mainly, three daughters, one son. So it was a big deal to put down the toilet seat. So
True.
I've made sure that I always put down the toilet seat, and I feel like I'm a bad little boy if I don't put it down.
Hmm.
And but she didn't care. And what's interesting too is it's like, I mean, we're together all the time, even when we're in the house or working side by side. We're always together. So we're in the bathroom together too, right? And so I'm in the bathroom doing my business, and she
Hmm.
walks in, and guys, sharing more information. But anyway, sometimes guys sprinkle, when we stand up. And so I've been taught, wipe the seat, put it back down. And she kind of looked at me and she said, you don't have to do that. And I'm like, well, I know, but I made a little mess. She's like, I know, but it's more important that we're together, that we're here. Those little things don't really matter, right? If you don't put the toilet seat down, if the toilet's a little bit dirty, it's okay. What's more important is our relationship,
Hmm.
that we're present with each other, that we're doing whatever. And so, again, like dishes, it's, she mainly does the cooking, because there's a few things I guess that I figured out how to make. I didn't even know, that I'm the one who, when we have duck and chicken roasted, I'm the one who does it. I don't know what
You're the
I'm
roaster,
doing,
huh?
but it's the best that she's ever had. So I'm on duty for that, right? But she cooks most everything else. But I usually do the dishes. And so it's the same thing. It's like it's a different experience too, because when I'm in the dish in there washing the dishes while she's cooking, right? Because sometimes I don't get the dishes done until we're getting ready to eat the next meal, right? And again, man, that's why I've been trained like, no, you do the dishes right away. But it's like, no, there's more important things. And so I use that time when she's cooking to do the dishes often so we could be together in the kitchen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I know some of you listening may kind of laugh about my whole thing about dishes, but I will tell you when I am in the kitchen washing the dishes with intention, giving love to the dishes, thinking about her, petting the dog as he comes by, I put off a different energy
Mm-hmm.
that she loves and thrives on. And so as I'm doing that, right? I'm helping us, I'm doing something, I'm doing a non-traditional male thing, right? Because women are supposed to wash the dishes. Not really, but that's, just a story that people say.
Sure.
But when I'm doing that, our relationship is actually growing because our energies are combining, right? As we're
Mm-hmm.
doing that. And so she'll actually tell me, she's like, I love it. I love when you wash the dishes with intention because I can feel it. I can feel it. And it's like, oh, well, that's interesting. I've never been with a woman before who has that connection.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we have this uncanny connection that we uh, can feel and sense things in each other that the other doesn't even recognize because we're so connected energetically. Um, and again, I mean, that's the relationship I'm in now, and I'm grateful for it, and it's amazing. It obviously has its challenges too, right? When you can kind of sense what the other person is thinking or feeling, it's sometimes a little uncomfortable, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, right? Especially because it ends up affecting you. Now, that's just a relationship I have. It may not be the relationship everybody listening is having. It may not even be the kind of relationship that you would have in this life. I don't know, right? It's a relationship that I have. But, again, maybe people can think, instead of trying to be like roommates, and I'm so different and I have to do this and you go do your stuff. And so you're
Mm-hmm.
separated most of the time in your relationship and in your physical proximity.
Mm-hmm.
What if there's things or ways that you can come together more? And how would that impact the love that you have for each other, the unconditional love you have for each other, the acceptance of what each of you are doing, because again, it's
Mm-hmm.
like every relationship is different and looks different, and there's different things you do, and, all this kind
Mm-hmm.
of stuff that, finding whatever works for you, maybe, and not throwing away the relationship before you actually try to work on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, depending on what it is, like I said, last marriage, there was nothing to fix. There's nothing to work on because that wasn't the issue. The issue was me and my time to leave. And I had some very clear uh, messages from the universe that now is the time, do it. And so, that I couldn't really argue with, or there was nothing to try to work through. But I see that too, where I think sometimes people give up too soon, maybe
Mm-hmm.
in a way of they're not actually looking at the impact their actions have, and they're not taking responsibility for their part in the relationship. And
Yep.
sometimes when you do that, things fix themselves. Sometimes they don't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know until you know, and you don't know because everybody's relationship is different. So,
Right. Yeah. No, that was totally my deal, with the roommate stuff. Like it wasn't until I changed and shifted from being very selfish, quite frankly, selfish and to more of a actual partnership, that problems start disappearing, you
mhm.
know. because a lot of those problems were as a result of me,
Yeah.
being selfish and not really understanding the proper way to be in a relationship like that.
Yeah.
So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
well, this episode of relationship advice with Jason, brought to you
No,
by
no. Jason just sharing his experiences, right? I've got
uh,
some experience in this one,
yeah.
but
Yeah, no, maybe a couple of good things though that I wanted to kind of summarize there was the first one is I think a key that you mentioned when it comes to when you do find maybe someone has a different path than you do. The first is acceptance. Can you accept them? Can you love them? And I like to think not despite your differences, but because of the differences. Can you love the fact that they do something differently, that they have a different way of looking at things or act or doing something than you do? As opposed to just like, well, yeah, okay, that's the way you do it. That's silly, but whatever. I guess I love you anyway. But like, I know that there are things about my wife that I love her because that is different than me, you know. Um, and that's great. And so I think that's really important when it comes to trying to maintain relationships. Because like you said, I think it's really hard to know when when is it time to stop, when is it time to give up, and when is it time to keep fighting. Um, and so there's no silver bullet, there's no magic answer, I think, to when that occurs. Like you said, in your case, you had the sense, you had these signs from the universe saying, all right, it's time now, time to go your separate way. But I think it's definitely worth communication. That was something you talked about, really focusing on communication up front, and listening, using these things we've talked about, on these episodes about listening to signs, listening to yourself, quieting your mind, kind of pushing trying to get past the ego and listen to what it really messages are you getting about this relationship. Is this something that um, is really not meant to be? Or is it just something that maybe you are being selfish or you're seeing something a different way or you're not communicating properly or maybe what's causing this that can be fixed and worth kind of working on. So I think a lot of really good information in there for people, a
mhm.
lot of good little nuggets that, yes, it's not technically advice, but experiences, which is, I mean, why we do this podcast. The experiences that we have are oftentimes very beneficial to others because they can see things in themselves, and the stories that we are able to tell and to share, and they can apply it to their lives.
Yeah. Well, and I think with this then too, this is where your spirituality will help you because you
Mm.
can get the answers if you want to hear and listen to the answers, right?
And that's a tricky thing. Are you willing to
That's
listen?
the tricky thing. Are you willing to listen? Are you willing to listen to what the real answer is? Or do you want to just keep
Right.
doing what you think you should be doing?
Mm,
And so I know for me, especially my last relationship, it was I was torn between this. I know it's only temporary. I know at some point I'm going to need to leave. I think it's not just physically moving out of the house, but I think it's probably moving states as well, for me. I was kind of getting that sense, but then there was a part of me that was like, but in so many ways, this relationship is so good. It's so much better than the
mhm.
relationship I had before. There's
Right.
not the emotional abuse and some of the other things that were going on, and so part of me was kind of, concerned that I was making an ego based decision
Mm,
and
mhm,
I was giving up too soon. And so it took me a while to kind of figure out the right questions to ask myself to get the answers that I
mm,
needed. And so I sat with this for probably many months, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. I don't know how long exactly, of what's the right question
mm,
that I need to have answered. And for me, it came down to, is this person my twin flame? That was a question for me, right?
Mm,
Is the person I'm with, are they my twin flame? Is this who I'm supposed to be with? Because if the answer to that was yes, then I needed to fight and do what was necessary to make things work, right?
mhm,
And so I struggled with that for a long time. I kept trying to get the answers myself. I was having, I was struggling with it. And
mhm,
finally, when I figured out that that was the right answer to ask, and I had a discussion with my mentor and said, is this person my twin flame? No. And the minute that he said that, I felt it. I felt it
mhm. Yeah.
to the core. And I started crying because to me, it was like such a relief,
Mm,
right? Because it was like I didn't really want to have to fight and do whatever because I didn't in my own mind I kind of knew that,
mhm.
but I was still kind of blocking the answer until he said that. And then I got
Yeah.
huge hit on that. Right. And then the next question was, is now the time to leave? And I get one of the answers like, well, you already know.
Yeah, you're not gonna get a yes or no answer to that question. Like
Yeah,
that one,
some
you're gonna have
some
to.
questions people don't answer, right? But it
Mhm,
was it was again, it's like, why would you stay any longer? If you have the answer to the question that really matters, you can answer all your other questions, right?
mhm,
And so I remember I got that hit very, very strong, very, very strong. Later that night, early in the morning, as I was kind of processing a lot of the stuff that had happened, I got this huge second download of exactly what I needed to do. And and it was I already kind of knew or suspected a lot of it along the way, but I wasn't asking the right
mhm,
question. And when I finally asked the right question and I was willing to accept it for what it was, that's when
mhm,
things changed. The minute I had that, other things fell in place very quickly. And literally within 5 months, I was divorced, done, packed up, and literally moved to another state. Things moved very, very quickly once I
mhm.
accepted what the real answer was.
Yeah. I mean, they say that the quality of the answer received it goes to the quality of the question asked.
Exactly.
So once you know the right question,
The rest of it becomes easy. Hmm?
so well, this episode has gone longer than I thought it was. I thought
I
maybe
know I
this would
looked
be
out at the clock. I'm like, whoa, all right, here we go.
maybe this would be a very short episode that we'd be like, okay, yeah, yeah, this is there, we'll move on. But yeah, no, a lot of stuff in this one. Um, and I'm sure that if you're listening to this, everyone at some point you're gonna run a situation where you're gonna have questions. And hopefully maybe this gives you a little bit of assistance in figuring out what you have to do, figuring out what's right for
Yeah,
you.
and I know we're long, but something else just hit me too that I think we need to still kind of
Sure.
address here because I see this a lot of times too with people is um, feeling like you have to have a partner.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so we've been talking about, kind of the partners that you actually have, but there's a lot of people, especially on the spiritual path, who don't have partners or they've left a
Mm-hmm.
relationship and they so badly want a new relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's supposed to be, maybe it's not supposed to be. I don't know. Each person is different. Sometimes the timeline is longer for certain people. I don't understand why. Um, for me, like I said, this last time it was very, very quick. I mean, I told you I was expecting to be single for years, years.
Sure.
That's what I went into it with, kind of the expectation, and then the universe said, "Well, no, that's not what's going to be, Jason." Okay, all
We'll show
right,
you.
we'll show you, right? But if I hadn't been willing
Hmm.
to accept that, I don't think the relationship would have come along as soon as it was either.
Hmm.
And so, one thing is, instead of looking for Mr. or Mrs. Right and desiring, wanting to have that romantic relationship so badly, you're pushing it away,
Hmm.
right? Instead of focusing on finding Mr. Right or Mrs. Right, focus on making sure that you're the Mr. Right or the Mrs. Right for whoever walks into your life. Because when you change yourself, that other person will be magnetized and drawn into your life,
Yep.
right? Now, it might be a month, it might be a year, it might be 10 years, it might not be in the rest of this lifetime. But, we each have our own path to follow.
Hmm.
And I just see so many people too that kind of get derailed by almost obsessing over needing to have a partner.
Hmm.
And again, I think that's part of an indoctrination like, well, as adults, we're supposed to have partners, we're supposed to be
Right.
married.
Why aren't you married? Exactly.
Why
Why
aren't
are
you
you?
married? Right? Sort of
Hmm.
thing. Why don't you have kids? Right?
Hmm.
But none of that really matters. Some of our blueprints, some people's blueprints in this life don't include a partner or don't include kids.
Hmm.
That's the blueprint,
Hmm.
right? And so, again, sit with it, figure it out, find the right questions to ask, and be more focused on making sure that you're the kind of partner somebody else would like to be with,
Hmm.
because that's making you into a better person. It's helping you evolve. And whether there's a partner or whether there's not, it doesn't matter. You're getting the benefit, right?
Yeah.
And if there is a partner that's supposed to walk into your life at the right time, they will.
Yeah.
Um, so I just felt like we needed to kind of touch on that a little bit, because I've seen so many people, with that, like, oh, I got to go find my twin flame. I got to do this. Who's my who is it? Who is it? Who is it not? Right?
Right.
And sometimes we don't really um, get the answer right away, or we get
Hmm.
confused, and it's like, just don't worry about it. It's going to happen exactly as it needs to at the right time.
Hmm.
So there we go.
There we go. A little bit longer episode, but we can edit out the unimportant parts. It'll be fine. Um,
Yeah, no, we're not going to do that.
it's all important,
It's
so it's
all
all gonna stay
important.
in.
Yeah.
It's all gonna stay in. So, well, hopefully you guys found some benefit out of this one today when you're dealing with relationships and things. And um, yeah, with that, I guess
Yeah.
we will wrap things up here. Any last minute?
Well, yeah, no, we'll bid adieu. And like I said, Brad kind of did a nice little, summary at the end there. But yeah, spirituality and your partner is a big deal. The partner you're with can hold you back spiritually, but it can also be a catalyst for driving you
Hmm.
forward in your spirituality too. And so, again, it's like with me, I've had to up level myself significantly in this
Hmm.
relationship, right? And it's been hard. It's been challenging in some ways, but it's been so worth it and so good, right?
Hmm.
That again, your partner, while again, you're the one with the responsibility, you're the one who has to do the work, but the person you're with can have a big impact on what you're able to accomplish or not accomplish as well.
Right.
And so it is an important topic, to think about and to look at the relationship that you're in, from a partner perspective, but even like we talked about before, family, extended family, friends,
Hmm.
because as you're evolving, sometimes people are going to spin out and it's okay. And there's
Yep.
nothing wrong with it. There's no shame in getting a divorce. There's no shame in being single either. Those are all, 3D constructs that people try to put on you to put you in shame and keep you down instead of where you need to be in your spiritual involvement. So,
Yeah. Mm. Awesome. All right. With that, we thank you guys for listening. And we will catch you on the next episode.
all right. See you,
See you
everybody.
then.